Okay, awesome. Welcome, Tony Chin. For those of you who have seen on my channel, I've done a review of his book, The Freedom Swimmers. So I'll give you a little introduction. Tony Chin is a father. He's also a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Black Belt, husband, a member of the Edmonton Police Service, and just an all-around awesome guy.
Well, thank you.
So, the first question is just, who is Tony Chin?
Wow. Right off the start there, some tough
Oh, yeah.
questions, I guess. Who is Tony Chin, I guess? No, I'm just, you know what? I've been with the Edmonton Police Service for the last, must be about 18 years now. I grew up in a small town, Tollfield, and have one older brother. He's 6 years older than I am. Always beat me up, so that's always about right. My parents.
You have an older brother.
Yeah, I got an older brother.
Is he larger than you?
No, he's not. I'm the biggest one out of the family, so.
Okay, so this was kind of a back in the day thing where he'd beat you up.
That's right. That was when I was really young, I guess. Now I can beat him up though. So, yeah, I just like I said, I've been with the service for 18 years. I do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for the last 11 years myself, and I just recently got my black belt and won.
Yeah, that was in September.
Yeah, September. Yeah, I won my division out in Masters Worlds in brown
I think I
belt.
forgot. Yeah, Masters World Champion right here.
Oh yeah, and yeah, we were in Vegas and I competed and I won my division out. So that was a great accomplishment too. So I'm happy about that.
And if I recall correctly, the last time we saw each other, you mentioned you were 43 or 47.
Oh no, I'm 43.
Okay,
I'm 43.
okay.
So I may look 47, but I'm 43. So
I didn't even think you were older than 40.
yeah, well that's nice.
Yeah.
Must be the Asian in me,
Yeah,
Look
yeah. No,
younger,
you
so.
look young. Okay, and so you were born in Edmonton.
No, I was born in a neighboring town of Tollfield, actually. It's
Okay.
a rural town of Tollfield, so.
Okay.
But it's only like maybe 40 minutes from Edmonton.
Okay. All right. So let's get into the next question then. So why did you want to write the book Freedom Swimmers?
You know what? I've known the story for, man, all my life. When I was a young kid, my mother always tell me, I was like, you better do good in school, or, I did a lot
The
to.
communists are coming.
Yeah, I was like, I did a lot for you to get here, so you better do good in school type of thing. And I already kind of knew the story. My mother would tell me, what she did, but it was kind of like Cole's notes of things, just like really short, brief things of like, hey, this is what I did, this is what happened, and when I was really young. So just to give an example of like what she had to do to endure for me to be here, kind of thing. But I never really understood it until I started like to say, hey, I got to write this book because I'm not going to be able to relay this information to my kids or to my grandkids or to anybody else if I don't actually really know the story, right? So I kind of made the endeavor for 6 years to get the actual story out and to understand the story, to get all the information that I had and do my own research too, not just, my mother's, what she observed, but also what happened, in China during that era, and to really encompass myself and understand what was really happening. And it was frightening, like I said, of what I actually found out. But it was more of a learning position for me than it was for anybody else. But I wrote the book because, like I said, I had to get the information out for my kids and for them to understand what my parents went through to get here. And like I said, I grew up in a small town of Polville. I don't know what I could say about my life to them that's gonna, really encourage them to, hey, let's go. So, and my mother was a perfect example. She always worked hard in her life, and I always try to encompass that too.
And growing up, going to school here, did you ever learn about what had happened either in communist Russia or China?
No,
you have
you know
any
what?
recollection?
I still remember. I think it was grade 4. You learn about the Great Wall of China. You learn about stuff about China in the great light of what's happening in the marvels of certain things. But I never actually really learned anything about China when I was younger in school, even junior high and high school. I mean, I think we learned about Russia, the history of Russia in junior high. Something a little bit more serious. But yeah, I didn't really know anything about China at all. Actually, it was such a mystery to me. All I knew was my my parents were there, my relatives have been there, and that's my descendants, and that's it. That's all I knew.
And as a social studies teacher, it is kind of sad when I look at the grade 12 curriculum, which is about ideologies, which you do discuss communism.
Yeah, yeah.
For whatever strange reason, they don't really delve into China and the communist history there, or many of the other countries.
I really don't, like I said, I obviously am biased. I obviously I wish they would teach more about that era and how many people obviously died during that process and everything and all the history behind it. And I can understand that, teachers are put under a lot of stress, right? Like how much they have to teach and so little of time they really have. But I don't, like I said, I really don't have much experience in the school field. But yeah, I wish they knew, they learned more, or sorry, they would know more of that information. But again, it's such a hard thing to discuss about too, and
it is rather complex. Like what I've learned about the history of how the communists came to power was essentially the Communist Party at the time. This would be right before the end of World War II. They kind of sat back in World War II and were like, yeah, we're not fighting this. And so the Chinese are fighting Japan, which is another aspect of history that isn't really taught.
Right.
Japan played such a significant and horrific role in World War II. And so the more or less the Democratic Party there is fighting the Japanese. And, the war ends thanks to, everything else that went on. And while that government was weak is essentially when the communists were like, oh, let's strike now. The iron is hot.
That's right. Yeah, yeah. It's crazy, like you said, the circumstances that occurred to get to that point where they were, like that, just like you were talking about, like Japan invading into China and the deaths during that time, and then, like you said, the political parties and what was, like you said, the weak, and then the Communist Party with Mao coming up to power. It was, it's a crazy time. Like so much stuff was going on in history of that area.
And then, I have a friend who very well informed about history. The history of China is so long.
Yeah, that's true.
So the communists have been around since the 50s, which is a blink of an eye in their history. When you're looking at 4,000 years, 6,000 years of history.
Yep.
Like it's nothing.
That's true.
And, even the previous sort of genocides, massacres that have occurred in China are so massive. Like up to the hundreds of millions of people being killed just due to civil conflict.
Yeah, yeah.
And so it's one of those tough ones, I imagine, curriculum-wise, of like, well, there's so much other history, like, why bother teaching this? Like, let's focus on the European examples, which has its pros, but also has its cons as well. But, honestly, and so in that review I did, this I think your book does such an excellent job of teaching a very down-to-earth, practical example of, like, here's one family and kind of the extended social community,
right,
and watch what happens to them as this process continues.
Yeah, I really didn't have any other idea regarding the book besides, like when you first think about it, is like, oh, should I give like more about facts, or should I do this, should I do that, but at the end of the day, it's really beyond the scope of like her circumstances. It's really just about her, and how much hard work she had to endure and go through just to see her life through, and everything beyond that, like the communism and everything else, it took a back burner to who she is. I consider her to be I consider her to be a hero in that way. Like if you like female protagonists, you like something enduring that. It's like David and Goliath, like you said in the review, something you can't fathom in your lifetime, as we live in such a prosperous area, and we have to think about, it's like, can somebody go through something like that? And my mother did go through something like that, and I have to give her props for it, because I don't think I could go through that.
Right?
I can't even swim. So.
No way.
No, I can't swim. I can't.
Really?
Yeah. Okay. I don't know why, but I've never, and I tried. I can't do it. So, yeah. So my mom's probably not proud of me for that one.
And if I understand correctly, your mother, she taught herself how to swim, like to escape.
Yeah, well, she was always a decent swimmer. Like obviously she learned when she was really, really young.
Okay.
But she also did go to schooling when she was younger, and she swam there to be competitive. So, and then when it was time to obviously do the swim itself, she was well prepared for it.
Yeah.
She knew what she was going to endure, but she also had the preparations for it too.
Yeah.
So, and she was physically fit during that time. So
Yeah.
that's what she tells me.
Well, you know what? When I'm recalling what I read from the story, it's like I don't know if that's an objective viewpoint here. Like if you spend years not getting enough nutrients,
Yeah.
you might say like I was wiry, like I was shredded, but you know maybe not in the best of ways, right?
That's true. Yeah, she never really talked about, like she never ever, like whenever I speak to her, she never talks about how hard it was, like how much she had to go through. But you can tell from, how she spoke and what she had to do, is like the stuff that she had to deal with, can't be hardships. Like it's definitely hard. So, and like I said, I don't know if I can go through it with it. I mean, I can't imagine my life being that situation, but I also try to put it as a reader, as myself, try to portray that too. It's like I want to be in her shoes. I wanted to go through that, and I did feel that. I felt like when I was into the story, and when I was writing it, it's like I felt like I was into that character. I was
Absolutely,
into her.
I would agree.
And that's what my biggest takeaways I wanted to do, was be in somebody else's shoes, not from a far away view of the situation.
I don't know if I mentioned that in the review, but it honestly feels like, like let's say you're playing a game and you're just kind of following along with these characters and you're watching them do that. Like one game I'm really into, God of War.
Yeah.
Right. You follow the journey that this father and son have.
Right.
And you feel like you're a part of it. And you did such an excellent job of making that feeling exist where, I feel like, oh, like, damn, where are we going next? Like, what's happening now? Like, this, issue, this roadblock occurred, and you're following it. It's like, okay, well, what are the options? And I felt very immersed reading it.
Right? Yeah, it was a tough call, because I lived, like I said, I tried to live through her shoes and go through those certain circumstances, but also in the same time, I'm also trying to make a story of a situation where it's not, it's like you said, it's suspenseful. It's something that, that makes a reader want to continue on with the story too, and keep it involved and keep it going. That was a big thing. It's like the book was quite a bit longer when I first started, and like I said, I have to thank all the other people that helped me along the journey of creating this book. Like I had a team of people with me, and like I said, I'm not a writer by, for a living. I like I said, I work my job, and I never thought I would want to write a book of any sort, but I did. And like I said, if it wasn't for the team of people, and I always have to thank them for everything they've done. It wasn't for them to look through the book and say, you know what, we got to keep this story going. We got to keep it going, because I want to keep the viewers in the shoes of my mother, and like I said, how suspenseful it was through the whole thing, and everything that she spoke to me about and told me about was everything chronological in order. Like the book is 100% chronological order. What she said, it's backed up from all the, obviously, like I said, the research I've done with China and how the timing of certain events occurred. And like I said, I can't imagine how fast it was. In some ways, it wasn't fast. It was 3 years of famine, but how fast everything diminished. Like the food and what was going on. It was like, oh man, that's crazy. So.
Right. And so, who is the intended audience then? Was there an intended audience? As you were writing, because I know you did mention like a lot of this about maintaining that story for your children. But
yeah. Well, actually, at first, it wasn't even supposed to be a story. It was supposed to be just notes taken about the event, so I can bring it back to my kids and say, "Hey, this is what happened during that time." But it wasn't a story at first, and as I started to write this, my mother's story, it started getting really interesting that I knew so little of the actual events, from when I was younger, because I'm like, there's way more context to this situation that she did. And she told me, like I said, when I was younger, she told me she swam across, the ocean, and I'm like, okay, mother, you swam across the ocean. But the part of the area she swam, why she swam, how she got there.
Yeah.
It was not just like, hey, I got to the shore and whoop, I swam. There was a lot of planning, and the people behind it too. So I was really interested in that. And as I started writing the story out and, man, I've been saying story a lot, but there was more of a need for me to say, hey, you know what? Maybe my kids are not just the audience, but everybody can be the audience, And that's why I kind of wanted to keep the story again interesting, because I wanted every reader to read it. Like I've had emails and messages from young kids from 6 to 7 years old to all the way up to seniors that are in their 80s and 90s,
Wow.
telling me about, how much they loved it and what they got out of it. And everybody else got a different message from it in some ways, always generally the same type of messages. But that was kind of my idea, was, anybody can read it, and everybody can be not just entertained, but also see the value in the book itself.
What was that message that you got then?
The biggest message, obviously, I got was, it was like, hey, your mother's so brave. The government, it's kind of crazy regarding the government. And, you never found things like speakers and watching over.
Man, that scene was so creepy for me to read.
Yeah.
I don't mean to offend you. So there's a scene in the book where, how do you say your mother's name?
You actually said it really well in the review.
Okay.
It's Suk Hing.
Suk Hing.
Yeah.
Okay. So she's describing, like, she's walking to work, and it's like, uh-oh, here we go again. Like, the speaker phones are blaring to essentially worship Mao.
Yeah.
Is what it became, what it devolved into. And it's like, hey, you better do this or else that's going to happen. Like, it's just blaring out these cryptic messages of, like, if you don't do what we're going to tell you, like, we will drag you to a dark room and you won't come back. Like, and that's one of the ways I teach communism and these utopias. It's like, hey, like, we are building paradise. Why would you ever want to get in the way of that?
Yeah.
And God, like, imagine hearing that at several times in the day, just government messages being blared at you.
Yeah. And imagine, like, so my mother would tell me that, when they moved into one of these shabby houses they were given, they had to go down to the local offices to get a picture of Mao to be placed onto the wall. And if you don't, you're in trouble,
Right.
And like I said, it's funny things. My grandmother, I guess, talked about, how she was not all for this, obviously, and she would, in her own resilient way, would hide the picture behind a door, hang it behind a door where the door opens, kind of thing. That I remember my mom would tell me that story. But yeah, I imagine those things. The thought police of just having other people, watching you, and it's like, it's nuts. I wouldn't want that any time.
Right. And I don't know if you're familiar with Jordan Peterson's work.
Yeah, I
He
do.
talks a lot about, what happened in Russia. Not so much in China, but you see this in Russia and you see it in China. Clearly, it's demonstrated in this book. But the kind of this utility of turning the citizens onto themselves.
Yeah.
Like, you need to report and inform onto one another. They did that in Nazi Germany as well.
North Korea.
Right.
I mean, you name it. Yeah, there's so many.
And again, there was other scenes that were just so creepy, so slimy, the behavior from people around them. And, and there's a part of me that goes, well, you can't blame them because, they're trying to survive.
Yeah.
They're being pragmatic. And, in that situation, it's like, if you're just a regular person, how do you create a revolution that will overthrow this tyranny, right? When you know that, like, hey, they're going to take you to a prison, they're going to beat you, and they're going to essentially strip you and put you on a cold cement floor for a couple nights and not feed you. And then they'll do that to all your friends.
Yeah, interviewing my mother regarding that time in the book, and I don't want to spoil anything, but where she is, imprisoned. Mm-hmm. It was, to hear it from her voice, it wasn't obviously a sign of joy, but just to hear her voice crack, or to understand, like, what was going on, and, the darkness, the rats, the washrooms, or lack of washrooms, I should say, peeing in a bucket and doing all those things, and not just the interrogations and all those other things. So you can hear the maybe, like I said, fear, sadness, and being angry. I guess I could encompass all three of those things in when she tells me those things, and then try to portray that in the book. It was a hard thing to try to do, and it was a hard thing for her to get through also. So it would took multiple interviews to get the straight details of all the little tiny things of that part. So it was hard.
Okay. So the next question, and we've kind of discussed it, but does or did Suk Hing ever reflect on her time in China? Just in general, because you did mention that a lot of it was, kind of encouraging her children, like, hey, work hard, do good, because this is where our family comes from. This is what we escaped.
Yeah, we don't talk like when we do talk. I mean, she obviously has a bias towards like the government. She obviously doesn't like the government any stretch.
Then and now.
Then and now. Yeah, let's be correct. Then and now. But she always reflects on how much she loves the Chinese culture, and the people. She's never ever said anything regarding like negative regarding that. But yeah, I mean, she does reflect upon like the turmoil that the government has created and what's happened. Even in local events and how much the book and her thoughts represent what it is going on now more than any other time when I wrote the book. When I first wrote the book, this was started 8 years ago. There wasn't as much tension between Canada and China, right? There wasn't as much.
And things have really
changed.
They've really gone downhill.
Yeah.
Both the relationship between Canada and China, but also like more people are challenging Xi, from my understanding.
That's right.
Because particularly with the lockdowns.
Yeah.
So actually, one of the friends, we were talking about that video. One of the friends who was there that night, he's also Chinese, and he was telling about how his brother was like boarded up into his room when he tested positive
during the COVID.
Yeah, and
yeah, I mean, for them to have the power just to do anything, it must be a tough life to have. I guess in that way.
God, you see videos like I saw this video of again those speaker phones. They're like alerting people like, okay, COVID lockdowns are happening. Like a couple people tested positive, and there's this video I saw, and these people are literally running. Like it's a crowd, like maybe 100, 200 people are trying to get out of this building before they lock it up.
Yeah.
And it looks literally like a scene from a zombie movie, right? And so then when she is reflecting, because the next question kind of tied with that was it with fondness or bitterness? And I'm assuming with mixed feelings then, hey?
Yeah. You know what? She never talks about how hard she's had it. She obviously, as a lesson to me, she would talk about those certain things. But as a personal conversations with her, she's never talked about, how hard she had it, or she's never spoke to like if she should have had it better, or all those things. She just tells me, you work hard, you don't stop, you keep going, you try to make a living for yourself, and you try to contribute to society, in a good way. And that's always she's distilled in me. That's all she ever tells me. She never regresses and like blames anybody.
Yeah.
She knows what she wanted, and that's how she is. And like I said, I kind of grew up in that same way. I have the same philosophy as her in that way.
Yeah. I'm curious then, why do you think that she has that mentality? So because we could talk about this in a modern context, like, she absolutely does not have a victim mentality about the fact that for every legitimate reason, she was a victim of something terrible.
Yeah.
But she refuses to have that mentality. Why do you think that is?
I can't speak for her personally, but I can speak for myself. And I think that's a reflection upon her and how I grew up. I don't try to blame anybody else for wrongdoings. I don't try to make excuses. I always try to, take responsibility for everything, all my actions, including right and wrong. And trust me, I've done a lot of things wrong in my life, but I've learned that, you have to at least understand those wrongdoings to make amends to what you can do in the future. And I think she's in that same way. She's the same way also, it's like she can't help to understand what's happened to her life, but I think she can try to make better in her life by understanding the wrongdoings that's occurred, And she has a huge knowledge of history, like Chinese history. She loves the history of China. Back in the old days of the dynasties, she loved that stuff and learning that. And I think that's probably a reflection of what she had to go through too. The history of what she had to go through made her, understand and want to enjoy that. And I feel like I'm kind of the same way. It's like like I said, I wrote the book not because I'm good at writing. I'm terrible at writing.
No, I disagree. The accessibility of this book speaks to the storytelling. Right?
I thank you again for that. So, but I mean, for me to become a black belt in jiu-jitsu when I was 330 pounds, like over a decade ago, I was extremely obese, and I was ready to in some ways die. As my health was kind of failing on me, or becoming a police officer. It was like nobody thought I would be able to account for anything in my life, and to have a career that I feel, that I feel proud of, and to be here. All those things took hardships to do. I didn't even, like I said, I didn't have any post-secondary. I didn't, like I said, I barely graduated high school. Like I was always kind of the runt of the family in that way. But to achieve all those things, I have to give it to my mother, through hard work, through perseverance, and through all the things that I've done. Like it got me to where I want to be, with luck obviously too. So I had a lot of luck and a lot of support from other people, but like I said, a lot of hard work. So and I feel she's probably the same way too.
That's interesting. And that note you mentioned about knowing the history, I guess that reflects a lot in potentially her understanding, like, as Chinese people, like this is where we come from. 'Cause, for people who don't know, China does have a very turbulent history, both internal and external, right? Like that Great Wall wasn't built as a
for fun,
as a tourist destination, right? Like there was something on the other side of it that they did not want to deal with at all.
That's true.
And I don't know so much about kind of Japan and China's ancient history. I don't know if there was a lot of negative relationships, but yeah, even internally, just knowing that this great nation has such a rich and diverse history, but there's been a lot of conflict. There's been a lot of shifting of power.
Yeah,
and I would imagine that if you have access to that information, it's like, okay, like this is just one more shift of power.
Yeah,
and this is just one more part of the story.
Yeah, I mean, down to the dynasties, like the shifting alliances and the infighting and all this to try to take territory. It's crazy, It's what a crazy life. I mean, a crazy history, I should say, more than anything else. So.
Yeah. So we'll move on to the next question then. And you've kind of already discussed this, but does your mother ever feel that she was robbed of a childhood? Because please do buy the book, read it. I'll put a link in the YouTube video for that. But she was 12 when this happened?
Yeah, she was really, really young, and even younger when the takeover occurred. But it happened during her childhood, really. I mean, from young to all the way up to teenager to almost adulthood in that way. And again, I've never heard my mom ever talk about like how negative things are, in her life, and how much she was robbed or she was a victim of something, and so she's never referred to that to me at all. But I can only say that from my own standpoint, I feel the same way too, So I believe that she doesn't believe that she's a victim of anything. It's just the circumstances that occurred and what she had to do to endure those, So.
And I'm curious, then, what are your thoughts on? So she is one of the lucky people who got out and escaped. Do you think that plays a big role in her mindset of like, hey, there were people who couldn't make it out. So despite the fact that maybe my childhood was robbed and I had to suffer and do this, hey, I got out. Like I'm in Canada now.
Yeah.
Do you think that plays a role there?
Yeah, it's that's a really good question. I mean that's something I'll probably have to ask her, or you'll have to ask her yourself. But yeah, I mean, the term freedom swimmers is not just one person, and not just the plural version of swimmers, but there were a lot of people that attempted that and lost their life through it. And obviously the government may have, shuffled those under the carpet of who actually passed away, or obviously there's no records of these people. But there was a lot of people that attempted it, and yeah, for her to make it, to endure that effort, yeah, I mean, it must play into the psyche that I've, I've done it. I've, I've made a better life for myself one way or another, and it wasn't all great, ice cream and when
Sunshine
she,
and rainbows, right?
yeah, sunshine and rainbows. When she got to the other side, she still worked hard. She worked her ass off to get to where she is now, and she's had a long life here too, and she's had a great support, and she has, we, like I said, we came from Tollfield, and the people there were fantastic to her, and the like family. So she's had a great life here too, but there wasn't, it's not like she had, like I said, she had everything here also, the 80s, there was a huge inflation and all, there's a whole bunch of turmoil regarding, her personal life while she was here also, personal hardships, people passing away. So, but I think she feels like she has probably accomplished something, and not just accomplished something for her personally, but for her family, because obviously I have a brother and me, and she has grandkids now. She has 4 grandkids, and to see them prospering and living and doing the things that they want to do. I mean, I'd probably be pretty proud of myself too, I guess, in that way, not for myself, but what I've been able to accomplish.
Yeah, like she's got a lot of gratitude for what's going on now where she is.
Yeah, and to Chinese culture, especially when it comes to family, is really important too. So to not just for herself, but to help the family too. So yeah, I can't imagine her being not proud of what she's accomplished, but I don't think it's ever good enough for her. So
Well, for sure, right? Like if you're very conscientious, hardworking, it's like there's always things you can do better and do more
yeah,
of, right?
yeah,
But then taking that moment to pause, reflect, and go back, like, hey, look, like our family's here, we're doing well. We have children, grandchildren, people are healthy.
yeah.
People have work and jobs and houses and everything, and it can always be worse.
I agree. I agree with you there. I mean, nothing's ever perfect. My life's not perfect either, but we live in a country that's been great to me. And I can't take it for granted either. So and I try to do something. I try to be as best I can. So
So, next question. Do you contemplate what your life would have been like if Suk Hing didn't make the decision to flee China?
yeah, I didn't really thought about that until after I wrote the book. I definitely wouldn't be an author of any sort of book.
You wouldn't be writing about the history
Yeah,
either.
probably wouldn't be writing the history about China. That's for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah, you know what? I thought about it a couple times. But it'd be a hard challenge to, like what would have happened if this happened. I can only reflect on what my mother went through and be in her shoes and understand her story. I can't imagine what would happen if I was there. Like I mean, I might have been like 6 feet shorter too. I don't know.
Actually, though.
Yeah, like I don't know.
And in terms of the history, like, when did the one-child policy get implemented?
From what I know, it's been around for a long time. I mean, it was during the time where there's overpopulation of the country, which then I think it ended. Don't quote me on this. I think it didn't end in somewhere in the
90s.
90s.
Okay.
And then there was a 2-child policy
Yeah.
and the 3-child policy. And then they finally abolished the whole thing altogether because there's a huge issue right now economically regarding the depopulation of China, and then obviously like the younger generation.
Do you know a guy named Peter Zehan?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Man,
I love listening. I love listening to him too. Actually,
he does not have anything good to say about
No,
China.
that's true. That's definitely
Right?
true.
I guess to give context on that, so the one-child policy, rough estimate, maybe 1970s.
Yeah, I think it was probably in the 70s, maybe even the 60s from what
Okay.
I remember, but I couldn't quote you on
So
that.
not that long after the communists come through, and again, the way the communist structure works is very top down, and whoever's in charge has power at the time gets to make these decisions. And so they pass this decision of, well, they're worried about overpopulation, and they don't know what to do. So they say, well, the smartest thing to do that we can think of is, well, just have one kid.
Yeah.
What they didn't anticipate was that for many of the non-industrial parts of China, terrible thing that happened was infanticide. Like a lot of people would kill the female child partly because one, her capacity to work in a field isn't going to be as great, and then when she's ready to be married, well, that child then leaves the household, which again for traditional society is a big thing. Like we can scoff at that all we want in modern times, but at that time in a non-industrial society, you kind of needed children to work. And so as that policy continues, so part of the reason why I brought it up is like, you have a brother, and maybe that's a good thing, I don't know, maybe that's a bad thing, whatever, but you have a brother. But if you were born around that time in China, that limits your family's options to, I guess, legally and safely have a second or third child. And so, again, tying in with what Peter Zehan has said is that obviously any data that comes out of China should be looked at twice or three times and questioned for validity, because China's playing a very tricky geopolitical game, as is Russia and the United States and all the other big powers. But the issue that's arising now is, one, you have this aging population and you don't have nearly as much young people. And then two, with kind of the history is, if let's say half the families decide, well, we want a male child, well, then you have this massive male population and a tiny female population, which creates other issues as well.
Right,
So
he talks about the inverted pyramid, right?
Yeah, right. And
right.
so, kind of the spirit behind that question is just, given that China has, what is it called, the social credit system, or whatever they call that specifically. It's in my mind.
The high key here. Anyways, yeah.
Whereas like in a country like Canada, we experience so much freedom, and the trouble with freedom, I explain to my students, is it requires a lot of responsibility, and you kind of have to accept that people are going to live their lives the way they want. And so with this social credit system, as far as I've learned, if you're an alcoholic, you're regularly drinking maybe 2-3 beers a night, like your score will go down.
Yeah.
If you gamble too much, your score will go down. Maybe we can say as a society that, that's a good thing, like we don't want too much of that going on. But what if it's like, well, you had eggs for breakfast. Well, eggs are bad for the environment. Too much carbon production. Well, your score is going to go down.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? You're not doing certain things we want. Like you're speeding a little bit too. Like I speed a lot. Right? Maybe I shouldn't be admitting that here, but your score goes down. So in that regard, like, do you ever consider, like, imagine if you were living in China right now?
Yeah, I mean, what kind of, like I said, we have, like I said, this social score of some sort. I mean, imagine, beeping your card at everything that you do, buying food or going to the movies or doing anything. I mean, and being judged based on what you do, like that specific information. And everybody talks about the draconian stuff regarding, social media and all those other things, like keeping tabs on you and stuff like that too. But we really don't know what that country is doing with that stuff. And we do know that there's some kind of a social credit score system going on there where you can be deemed less worthy than somebody else. And that's the whole discrepancy part, right? It's like, how can you be deemed more worthless than somebody else is, when that's not the true fact of the situation. And I like I said, for me being in that situation, it'd be really tough for me to be in there. So, because like I said, like much as you speed, sometimes I speed too. I make mistakes. Sometimes I eat too many burgers. Is that going to be something that we have to worry about in the future? It's one of those things where I can't. Like I said, I can't imagine me being in it, but I can't imagine anybody here, like in their own right. I can't imagine they want to be in a situation like that either.
No, right? Especially the young people who, for every right that they have, are partying regularly, like Friday, Saturday, every weekend when you're in university. It's like, hey, your social credit score goes down. Well, now you can't take the bus or the LRT.
Yeah.
Or Ubers cost twice as much because, they're being punished for a decision that, again, this top-down structure has said, we don't like that.
Well,
there's you're doing that.
I mean, right now, I think there's a rule regarding how much you can play online for PC games. You imagine only playing big. I think you can only play, say, God of War for 2 hours of the day or 1 hour of the day or something like that. I can't remember what the actual time limit they have on it, but they wanted kids to have less time in video games. So it's like we're putting in a law that you only play 40 minutes. I mean, man, that's gonna suck,
right? And at a surface level analysis, like, well, do we want our youth playing video games for like 3, 4, 5 hours a day? Not really, but how do you address that issue? Is it by like putting a gun to people's head and saying, well, if you want to play video games 5 hours tonight, okay, no lunch tomorrow,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Or you don't get bacon now. If you love bacon, too bad, too many video games.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? And so that would just be a very dramatic shift. Okay, we'll go on to the next question then. So you mentioned to me in a conversation once that the book was also meant for your daughters. What lesson do you want them to take from this book?
I just want my daughters to realize, what life they have now, and not just reflect on my mother's life, but how much freedom they have here and what they can do with their life and how they can, be a responsible adult when they get older and what they can do with their lives and yeah, and like I said, by putting in hard work and effort and being a good citizen, I think they could do something good for this world, instead of being on the bad side of this world too. So, yeah, that's why I want them to take away from this more than anything else. I want them to obviously to think of my mother as a hero, as somebody that should be respected, and I guess that also goes in the way of how you should treat your elderly people, your elders, I should say, and your grandparents. You should have more respect for them, and so that's all the things. I mean, everything. I believe that my kids should learn those things from the book, but not just from the book, but also from my mother. So I
Very
think
strong family connections there.
yeah, they love their grandmother. So and they've been pretty good to her. And like I said, my kids I'm fairly lucky. I mean, they're sometimes hellions, but I mean they're great kids. I mean, I can't ask for any better right now. So right now, we'll see in a couple of years. So, but right now,
Your children are one's 10?
no, 12 and 14. So,
Oh, okay.
so 12 and 14. So.
It's an interesting time to be a 12 and 14-year-old.
Yeah, that's why I said now. Let's give it a couple more years and see
Yeah.
what happens. But
Yeah. Okay, and I guess we'll add to that, and you've already kind of discussed a bit. What lesson can the general population take away from this book?
just like everything else I said regarding my kids, I think it goes to the general populace too, like to respect their elders and to really understand their past. And that's one of the things I learned the most to myself after I wrote the book. When people came, like I said, the emails I got from people was like how much history they had within their own family. Their grandparents went. So I've had so many stories about, hey, my grandparents or my parents went through something very similar through, Poland or what other countries they've been in. They've told me. I've sat down with people just told me their stories, of their parents going through this similar situation, how they got out. And that's the one thing I learned the most for myself was, you know what? You don't have just to read the book about the history of my mother, but I think we are in the last pinnacle area of our lives where we can ask our parents, our grandparents, because they're still alive, about their past. Because, your kids or my kids are going to ask me about my past. And like I said, I grew up in a small town of Tollfield. I don't know what I can tell you about them, We still have the opportunity to learn from the past, and from my parents. And I think we might be the last generation to learn so far back into that area that they can get something out of it. And like I said, not just through a mother, but through their own grandparents and through their own parents. That's the biggest lesson I learned through it. But again, all the other lessons I've learned, for my kids, I wish for them upon just the general masses that would read the book.
And that's interesting too, you bring that up, because it does say that it suggests, something has changed dramatically for the better between, even like my parents. It's kind of funny. I'll share with you. So when I was young, my dad would tell me like, oh, he had spent time in Afghanistan. He worked there.
Yeah.
Right? And as a kid, like that just flies over my head. Even like as a young adult, right, flies over my head. It's not until I'm a teacher learning about the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan that I'm like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Dad, you said when you were 20, you went to Afghanistan. So my dad was born in 1960. when he was 20 in the 80s.
That's when I was, yeah.
That's when Russia was invading Afghanistan. So I was like, this one day I remember I sat down with him. I was like, Dad, what were you doing there? Like, what were you doing in Afghanistan in the 80s when the Russians were invading? Like, what kind of work were you up to? It turns out, so he was doing construction work there. He helped build an airport. Well, he worked on building an airport that unfortunately now is gone, and I think well before the Taliban took over. But just to learn even about that, like, Dad, what did you do when you were like my age?
Yeah, yeah.
What were you up to, right?
It's such a crazy history of what, and like I said, not just my mother and my father, but everybody's parents had to go through to endure to be here in this country, right? Everybody has this crazy past that you can just ask, and you'll get a crazy amount of information and a story that you'd be so interested in listening and hearing that you would never have thought of, until you started really thinking about, oh wait, yeah, how did my parents get here? How did my grandparents get here? I got no clue. So that's the one thing you should ask. If you're ever interested in your own past history or your own family, you should ask them how they got here. There's so much information out there regarding that.
And I was just telling my students the other day, so like my family migrated here in 1998. I would have been 2 years old. But the reason why we left Pakistan, and if this didn't occur, I don't think my family ever would have decided to leave, which my life would have been dramatically different, right?
Yeah.
And Pakistan is a country with very low literacy rates and zero to no infrastructure. So many people do struggle there. But they left Pakistan because the government there determined that my particular denomination of Islam, that we're not Muslims. So within their constitution, it explicitly discriminates against us, like by name. And additionally, then it is okay it's quasi okay for people to murder people from my community, the Ahmadiyya community. And so many people, there's a kind of a mass exodus of people from the Ahmadiyya community leaving Pakistan in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s. And still, right, whoever can get out for religious freedom's sake, anywhere else is better, more or less anywhere else is better.
That's crazy.
And, I was telling the students, I think it was in like 2008, there was a mosque that was attacked, right? Like guys showed up with AKs and military guns, and about 50, 75 people died while praying, worshiping. And so, I really agree with that point. Like, take a moment. And sometimes it can be very tough, right? We both come from a culture where maybe that relationship between parents and children can be at times strained, and you can't always speak freely and emotionally.
Sure.
And maybe that wasn't so much so in your house. I don't know, but certainly in my house, sometimes it always felt like when you do ask, like, "Hey, Dad, what did you do in Afghanistan?" It's like, "Oh, I worked there." Like, that's the story. And it's like, okay, I guess that's the story then.
Yeah, I can totally see that. And like I said, my father was hard to be around sometimes. I loved him to death, but I mean, he didn't say too much, and especially about his past. But I think if you learn something about your parents or your grandparents' past, I think you also learn something about them, and you will start to understand more about them and why they are the way they are. And it may give you more insight into, why the things and knowing how you grew up the way it was, And I totally see it. After, like I said, doing the story of my mother, I understand like how I grew up now, why she instilled those things that she did, why she did those things that she did, I understand that. And I wouldn't, as a parent myself now, I'd be like, I'd probably do the same thing. So like, it's like whipping me when I was, a young kid for, like stealing something from their store, and stuff like that. Not whipping, but, giving me punishment and stuff like that. It was like, it's like, man, I understand, I do understand more.
And especially when you contemplate, well, what if they didn't correct me?
Yeah.
When I needed correcting.
Yeah,
when
sure.
You're just out and about as a young guy, doing stupid stuff, filled with testosterone, being ridiculous, right? Like, if you didn't have two solid parents putting you right back into line of like, no, like, this is the path we're going on.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, sure.
Very important. And I do like that bit that it's certainly as an adult, putting myself in my parents' shoes at difficult times
Yeah.
growing up helps me to have more empathy and understanding and forgiveness for, like, why certain things went the way they did in my childhood
Yeah.
and in
Sure.
my life.
Yeah.
I think that has certainly helped me to create a better relationship with my family, my parents, right?
Yeah.
And to continue having that relationship as I get older, and hopefully one day, whenever that happens, but have children, wife, kids, and all that.
We always wish I was like, man, I'm never gonna grow up like you, mom or dad. You as a young kid, it's like I'm never gonna grow up like you. It's like as you get older, like, man, actually, I should probably grow up more like you.
Yeah,
So
right.
it's such a topsy turvy world, we live in as we grow up and as we get older. It's like we start seeing in their light, in their eyes of what's happening. So yeah, I hate to say that they're right, most of the times they're kids. And they're not always right, but yeah, sometimes they were right, I guess. So sometimes.
Okay, let's go on to how do we keep the freedom swimmers' memory alive?
I can't say this enough about all the support I've had from the book, from friends and family, from people all over the world, just emailing me. And like you said, how you keep it alive is to read the book. I mean, it's great that people supported me and purchased the book and done all those things, but I just want people to read the book. More than anything, it's not about profit margins. It's not about anything else. If anybody wanted to read it, I would lend out a copy of my book.
Like, it's very cheap too. It's like 10, 12 bucks, 14 bucks, I think.
Yeah, it's $13 on Amazon,
Yeah.
and like
By no means is Tony trying to make a steep profit off this.
yeah, trust me, I'm not making a steep profit on any of these. I'm about a million. I'm about a million. Books short of $1 million. So I'm close, but
Yeah, we'll get there one day.
yeah, I need to put about a million more. But you know what? Just you reading it, and like you said, man, like I said, I can't thank you enough to having me here and to speak to you, and like I said, just to have a discussion about not just the book, but your past history and your family. All those things are important to me. It's just to keep the book alive is to really to talk to your family. That's how you keep the book alive. And reading the book and understanding some of this, and all the people that maybe have done something similar to my mother did. It's like maybe in that culture, maybe you should ask about your grandparents or your mother. They may not be they may not be as open as my mother was, but getting any information will definitely help. And not just getting information, but then reading up on the situation too. Like there's tons of information on the internet regarding the history of that time. And not just like obviously my mother's history, but their family's history, and just like you said in Afghanistan, and it was like currently stuff going on in Afghanistan right now as we speak. So I always just want to say, like you said, to keep the book alive is to speak to your family and to get understanding of your history, and to read the book, and to, like I said, and pass it on to somebody else. If it's not just the information, but pass it on what my message is for that. About family and about enduring and working hard. That's really about it. That's really the message of the book was.
I think that's a great message, and it takes a lot of courage and vulnerability to have that discussion. It certainly can, maybe not for everyone, but for people to open up about their struggle and where they came from, and because for many people, it's like we don't really ask that question much, right?
No.
Like, hey, like, tell me about the worst parts of your childhood. It's like, I'd save that for the therapist, maybe, right? Like,
That's true.
you know what I mean? If that, right, or if anyone, but
A lot of people really don't want to talk about it, and they really put it deep in within themselves to not tell, because I don't think as me, it's like I never want to tell my kids bad things about my past and stuff like that, but sometimes they can learn and I have to understand that too, and I guess it goes to the grandparents and parents too, is like we can learn by telling people things about your history and not keeping it a secret all the time. And I think that's an important message for anybody. It's like, sometimes if you need to talk, you talk, and don't be afraid of that. Don't be scared of letting that go, because I think it will be a relief to you, but also educating to everybody else too. So,
and just a side question then, how do you, like, as a father, how do you balance that?
Um,
You know, because it's like how much is too much when you're chatting with their kids, right?
I always try to be honest with the kids. I always try to be. I always try to instill in them that I I will respect you. I'll always respect you, but you should. You have to tell me the truth, and you have to tell me things that are going on in your life, and I will tell you things that are going on in my life too. And I think, I don't tell them, what happens in my work. That's a little bit too much. But I think
Well, also just the nature of working in the
that's
book.
true.
You can't just openly speak about that
But I think
certain times.
especially men, I mean, we don't talk about our feelings a lot, to other men, but also to your kids. And I think that could be important. I learned that over the last, little bit, is that sometimes telling them how you feel is important. And like I said, it's a relief for me, but also maybe educational for them that, your father is not the toughest guy in the world either. So, and things are going on in his life that maybe that's why he's stressed or whatever he's doing. So, yeah. And again, it's trust me. If you knew the balance, could you please tell me? Because I have no clue. I'm not. Like I said, I try to be the best dad as I can, but I'm not. I'm not any stretch of the imagination the best parent in the world either. I try my best, and like I said, I'm very fortunate to have two great kids. But man, like I said, if you know the formula, please tell me because don't ask
Well,
me.
I'm still trying to figure out the formula for wife and kids. So maybe you'll share that with me.
Yeah.
We'll work on the next formula together.
All right. We'll have a meeting here next week about that. So.
Okay, we'll skip this next one because I think we talked enough about kind of communism and whatnot. But we'll go on to what's in store for Tony Chin. Any future projects related to the book?
Yeah, like I said, I've considered writing another book, but it's not really an important factor for me right now. Again, the book was a one-off that I needed to do for obviously my parents. I've had so many people ask me, it's like, hey, can you write a book about, my parents or my grandparents? Or, man, I've had a lot of those requests. And even though all those stories are really interesting, I had a very personal interest to this book. So obviously I took extra effort to do it. And it was very stressful though. I mean, you can't imagine writing a book for 6 years. Like I don't know who wrote a book for 6 years. I mean, except for maybe Game of Thrones. But writing a book for 6 years, making sure that for me that had to be perfect, because the last thing I needed somebody to say was, "Hey, your mother's story is really good, but your writing is really crappy."
God.
Like imagine somebody coming up to me and saying that, like how.
Because there's such a big personal investment into it. Right?
Yeah, and I would never want to dishonor my mother's memory by having bad writing in this thing. Like that'd be the worst thing to have in a book. And it's like, hey, I really liked your mother's story, but it's like your story's kind of your story's kind of crappy. So it's like, oh, thanks. It's like, and that just not just leads back to me, but it also leads back to my mother, and I would never ever want that to happen. So I had a huge personal interest in it, but it was a huge toll on me in that 6 years to make sure I had it right. And I would never, again, I would be interested in writing another story with the team I bring back with me, but I would never want to dishonor them either. So it's a lot of endeavor and a lot of effort and a lot of hard work to make sure it's done right. And I wouldn't be opposed to doing it. It'd be a tough, and it would be a story that I would have to be personally interested in too. And I think everybody has, like I said, I have a lot of people that tell me, it's like, I want to write a book too. I want to write a story about my grandparents. I think anybody can do it. If you just put the effort, like the hard work and effort into it, anybody can do this. So, but back to the question, yes, I'm working on my newest project is working on a documentary.
Okay.
So I wanted to bring more people into not just the book and not just the one-off regarding my mother, but also other people that have done something similar, and maybe fly all over Canada to interview these people and bring them into a documentary form, so I can continue the story, because I'm not totally exhausted from the story that I would say I don't want nothing to do with anymore. I'm still very interested. I'm more into history of China now than I ever was before. So I'm still very interested in it, but I also want to hear from other people too. And to hear from other people about the same thing would be very interesting for me. But also, I would be honored to try to get that story out, and that's important to me. But again, it's in the works. But we're having it's been a hard road because there's a lot of people that have gone through something like this but are not willing to talk about it.
Yeah.
They're willing to talk about it, but off camera. It's like they don't want anything to do with, a documentary, but they're willing to tell me the story.
Do you think they're worried? Like, hey, what if the Chinese government discovers this information that we're telling them?
Yeah.
Because again, if you escape, it's not like it was public information that you escaped.
Yeah.
Right. So
for whatever reasons, their personal reasons, I don't know. Maybe they still have family there. Maybe they have.
that as well.
Obviously, recently in the news regarding this, police stations in Canada.
Well, that was wild. For those of you who don't know, there's I don't even know if you can say that the story is coming out because I don't know how much CBC and Global talk about it, but some of the other news sources talk about that there were police stations discovered that were essentially from the Chinese government.
Yep.
So it's like a fake police station, which is
it's like you said, it's
very
and they're in
scary.
Canada, right?
Yeah.
So and that's not even a dispute anymore. It's been recorded and it's been said over the news. So I don't know how much any of that has to do with it. Like I said, probably a combination of both, personally and the surrounding communities, what's going on. But I've had a lot of setbacks regarding who I can possibly bring in to do this documentary, and that has been a hard one. I've been working with a team of people to kind of how can we mitigate those things? How do we? And it's a more than a story in itself in a book. This project is even harder than than any book that I've ever written. But it's a new project that I'm fully committed to, that I want to create. But again, it's going to take time, and hopefully, I can be successful in the future with it. So,
how are you going? Like, how are you going about doing the whole documentary? Like, did someone kind of sponsor the story, or are you doing it grassroots on your own?
grassroots on my own,
Wow.
with a team of people that I feel that have supported me throughout the whole thing. Not through financial means, but also through financial means. Their technical specialties, their skills. Yeah.
Okay.
So a lot of people have come and like, hey, I do documentaries, or I do this, I do that, and there's so much to go behind it. So I'm like, I've been very fortunate to have a lot of support to continue on with the project and to get into step B, like plan B, or how we're going to continue on with this thing. Until I get to plan Z, that's when the thing is completed. But I'm currently on plan B, maybe. So it's a long ways to go. So,
Okay. I guess we'll wrap up with any concluding thoughts.
man, thank you very much again for having me. I just want
My pleasure. Thank you.
And if you're ever interested in reading the book, it's on Amazon.
Put that up again. We got The Freedom Swimmers by Tony Chin. And again, I'll put a link to that.
Yeah, if you read it, please send me a message regarding anything. Like I said, I always love hearing from fans about if they learned anything, if they didn't like it, I don't know, whatever. Just send me a message saying that you read it.
Some pro CCP people just start spamming.
Yeah, don't do that. Don't not that part. And if you do like it, please put a review on any of the places that you purchased on. That really helps me. It's
I should do that.
It's seeing other people write reviews really helps other readers to say, hey, I'm interested in that story, or or whatever the reasons why they liked it, and makes them want to purchase it too. So very fortunate about that. And like I said, if you do read it, write a review and send me an email if you're interested. I'm always open. You can always email me at tonychen36@gmail.com. And just like to hear from you if you do read it.
Awesome.
All right.
We'll wrap it up with that. We'll stop the recording.